Good afternoon, Allendale. Today I'm going to do part 3 of the Wild Robot Escapes. The last time we left Roz, she realized that she's trapped on Hilltop Farm and she's trying to find someone to help her escape, but she's not sure if she's ever going to be able to. Chapter 15, The Children. As time rolled by, Roz saw less and less of Mr. Sharif, but she saw more and more of the children. They were shy at first. The robot might look up from the pasture and see Jed peeking out around the corner of the barn, or see Jaya spying from the branches of a tree. But the children were growing bolder. Then one day, Roz marched into the workshop and heard giggling. She walked to the closet in the back, opened the door, and there was Jaya, smiling and trying not to laugh. "I'm hiding from my brother," whispered the girl. "Close the door." The robot closed the door. A minute later, Jed ran in, flushed and out of breath. "Hey, Roz, have you seen Jaya?" The robot just stared. "I know she's in here," said Jed. He began prowling around the room. He searched under the work table and behind the tool chest and between all the bulky workshop machines. Finally, he marched up to Roz and said, "I order you to show me where my sister is hiding." The robot pointed to the closet. Jed smiled mischievously and tipped over. Then he flung open the door and screamed, "Found you!" "No fair," Jaya whined. "Roz showed you where I was hiding." The girl scowled at the robot. "That wasn't very nice, Roz, but you can make it up to me by playing hide and seek. Count to 100, then try to find my brother and me, okay?" There was a brief pause, and then the robot said, "Okay." Jaya and Jed squealed with delight and scampered out the door as Roz started counting. The robot's sensitive ears listened carefully to the children outside. She heard quick footsteps crunching across the driveway. She heard a giggle, the sound of tree branches shaking. She heard a grunt, the sounds of hay bales being shoved aside. When the robot finished counting, it took her exactly 5 seconds to find Jaya up in a tree, and it took her 8 seconds to find Jed in the hayloft. "Wow, Roz is really good at seeking," said Jed as he picked hay from his hair. "Yeah, well, let's see how good she is at hiding." But Roz was even better at hiding. While the children counted, the robot silently slipped away. An hour later, they still hadn't found her. The siblings stood in the driveway defeated. "We give up, Roz," shouted Jed. "You win," shouted Jaya. The junk pile beside the barn started moving, and Roz appeared. The robot had been sitting there all along, perfectly camouflaged among the scrap metal and old farm machines. "The next time we play, you have to let one of us win," said Jaya to Roz. And the next time they played, Roz did. The robot enjoyed having the children around. They brought a little lightness into her world, and she hoped to bring a little lightness into theirs. Life must have been dark since their mother passed away. However, Roz had another reason for wanting the children around. She needed them. Her only chance of ever returning home was if Jaya and Jed could find it in their hearts to help her escape. But this was a delicate situation. If Roz tried too hard, the children might say something to their father. If she didn't try hard enough, she might be stuck on the farm forever. Chapter 16, The Robot's Dream. Cows grazed in the pasture. Wind rustled through the tall grass. Clouds drifted over fields. Farm machines rumbled and buzzed. Milk flowed into bottles. Bottles were packed into boxes. Boxes were loaded onto the milk truck. The truck drove away full and returned empty. Children romped around with their dog. A man sat on his desk. A robot dreamed of escape. Chapter 17, The Birds. Hilltop Farm was home to many birds. Swallows were always swooping low over the grass and picking off insects. Crows cawed from the fields like a gang of hecklers. At night, owls glided above the countryside, silently searching for furry little meals. The robot was stuck on the farm, but the birds were free to go wherever they pleased. Lucky birds. One day, Roz was standing in the pasture, admiring a hawk as he soared through the sky, when the cows began grazing around her. Their slow footsteps crunched in the grass. Their teeth chewed and chewed. Their tails flicked at flies. All the while, Roz stood there, staring up at the hawk. And then came Lily's soft voice. "What are you thinking about, Roz?" The robot turned to the calf. "I am thinking about Brightbill," she said. "It was not so long ago that I was watching my son soar through the sky, and that seemed like another lifetime." "You must hate your new life," said Annabelle. "I can't say that I blame you. Farming looks like such grueling work." "Actually, I like farming," said Roz. "Somehow it feels right to spend long hours working with machines and tools and crops and animals. But I miss my old life on the island." Tess had a mouthful of dandelions, but that didn't stop her from speaking. "Maybe you should start thinking of this farm as your home. That island is awfully far away. There's a good chance that you'll never make it back there." "Don't say that," cried Lily. "Roz just has to make it home. She needs to be with Brightbill and her friends." "Tess is right," said Roz. "I may never make it home. If I were a bird like my son, I could fly home all on my own anytime I wanted. But I am only a robot." Nobody spoke after that. The cows went back to grazing, and Roz went back to admiring the hawk. Her eyes followed the bird as he soared through the sky, free to go wherever he pleased. Chapter 18, The Entertaining Robot. The children wandered out behind the farm buildings, through a clearing, and over to an old oak tree. It was the same tree their father had climbed on when he was a boy. Mr. Sharif's initials were carved into the bark. At the bottom was a long list of initials. For generations, all the Sharifs had carved their initials into that tree, going back to the ancestors who first built the farm. Someday, the children would add their initials to the list. Beneath the leafy branches was a scattering of acorns. Jad cleared a spot for himself, sat down, and pulled a small computer from his pocket, while Jaya climbed above. The siblings spent the afternoon there, lazing around the tree until the robot marched past, carrying the big, heavy toolbox. "What you doing, Roz?" called Jad. The robot stopped. "The drone has crash-landed again, and I'm going to fix it. Do you need any help?" "I do not need any help." "I'm bored," said Jaya, her legs dangling above her brother's head. "Can't we do something fun, Roz?" The robot put down her toolbox and said, "What would you like me to do?" "I don't know," said Jaya, thinking hard. "Can you do a backflip?" "Yes, I can do a backflip." A grin spread across the girl's face. "Roz, I order you to do a backflip." At that, Roz crouched, and then she leaped into the air, flipped backward, and gently landed on her feet. A perfect backflip. Jad put his computer away. Jaya jumped down from her branch. The children were impressed. "What else can you do?" said Jad. "Can you juggle?" "Yes, I can juggle." "I order you to juggle some of these acorns." Roz walked up to the tree, picked 3 large acorns from the ground, and began juggling them in perfect rhythm. Jaya studied the robot's movements, and then began tossing the acorns into the air as well. The first one went a little too high. The next one went a little too far. And soon they all went rumbling back into the grass. "Do you know any jokes?" said Jad. Why did the chicken cross the road?" "Never mind," Jad scratched his head. "Can you tell us a story?" "Well, what kind of story would you like to hear?" "A robot story," said Jad. "An animal story," said Jaya. "How about a robot and an animal story?" said Roz. The children smiled at each other. Then they sat against a tree and looked up at their robotic storyteller. "Once upon a time, there was a robot who lived alone on an island," Roz began. "She spent her time wandering across mountains and forests and meadows, and then something terrible happened. Rocks fell and the robot tumbled off a cliff. She survived the fall, but sadly, the rocks killed 2 geese and smashed 4 of their eggs. until she heard a tiny peeping voice from somewhere nearby. She followed the peeping voice and discovered a perfect goose egg sunk into the dirt. The robot carefully picked up the egg and carried it away. When the gosling hatched from his shell, the first thing he saw was the robot looking back. "Mama, Mama," he peeped. The gosling thought the robot was his mother, and from that day on she was. The robot adopted the gosling as her son, and together they made a funny little happy family. The end. The children sat there and thought about Roz's strange story. Then they looked up at her and said, "Well, what happened next?" Chapter 19, The Storytellers. Roz and the children had a new routine. Several times a week, they would gather beneath the oak tree, and Roz would tell stories about the robot on the island. The children loved hearing how the robot survived mudslides and bear attacks in the harsh winter weather. They loved hearing about how she befriended the island animals, but the stories they loved the most were about the robot and her son, the goose. He sounded like such a nice goose. Roz told the children story after story. What she didn't tell them, what she couldn't tell them, was that the stories were true and that they were about her. The children wanted to get in on the storytelling fun. So Jaya told adventure stories about dragons and monsters, and Jad told silly stories about aliens in outer space. But as the children grew more comfortable with Roz, they began talking about their own lives. They talked about growing up way out in the country. They talked about their schoolmates and their friends and their family. They talked about how their parents used to work together around the farm and how perfect everything was before the accident. In an instant, their lives were upended. Their mother was gone and their father was injured. Mr. Sharif tried to keep the farm going by himself, but there was so much to do and he was so weak now. The farm machines powered along, doing their jobs as usual, but they needed to be maintained and monitored. Eventually, the machines started breaking down and the farm started falling to pieces. The children wondered if life would ever feel normal again. "And that's why we got you, Roz," said the girl. "We needed you to save this place." "And that's exactly what you're doing," said the boy with a smile. All right, I'll be back again with part 4.